you stupid and useless old woman! You must eat from this pit!
She forced her mother-in-law to eat from a poisonous pit. The revenge will shock you. He walked in just in time to see his wife lift a trembling old woman by the arm and drag her toward a shallow pit behind the house. Not just any woman, his own mother. The same woman who raised him, prayed for him, and trusted his home would be her safest place. He wasn't supposed to return early. She didn't know he was standing behind the mango tree, watching. She thought her cruelty would stay hidden in the shadows. But what he saw next tore through him like a blade. She forced his mother to kneel, forced her to eat from a poisonous pit she had secretly prepared. A pit meant to break her spirit or end her life slowly. He thought he married a kind, respectful wife. But cruelty has a way of showing itself when it thinks no one is looking. And that day, the mask she wore cracked wide open. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Ocean of Tales. Kindly like, comment, and subscribe on this channel. We will be grateful if you help us do this. We will be notifying you when we drop a new video. Don't forget to tell us where you are watching from. Now he's not just a husband caught between loyalty and love. He's a son with a terrible decision to make. Expose her or punish her in a way she'll never forget. Either way, the revenge that followed didn't just shake the village. It changed the fate of everyone involved. And she never saw it coming. A sharp rustle cut through the quiet morning as he stepped through the compound gate, expecting nothing more than the soft hum of chores beginning. Instead, he froze mid-stride when he saw movement behind the mango tree, a figure dragging another across the dusty ground. His breath caught as he recognized the trembling shape of his mother, her frail arms limp, her feet scraping helplessly behind her. The sight twisted something deep inside him, turning his heartbeat wild and uneven. He leaned closer, struggling to believe what he saw, unaware that this moment would shatter every truth he once trusted. He shifted slowly behind the tree, careful not to break a twig or disturb the morning fumes rising from the soil. The sun cast long shadows, turning every gesture into a dark accusation etched on the earth. His wife's grip tightened on the old woman's arm, her movements forceful, deliberate, almost practiced. His stomach dropped as realization clawed at him. This wasn't a moment of anger or frustration. This was a routine, a ritual, something she'd done before. He felt the air grow heavier around him, pressing against his chest, as if the world itself warned him not to look away. He watched her drag the old woman toward a shallow pit hidden behind a cluster of dying shrubs. The ground surrounding it was stained with something foul, dark patches, rotting leaves, and strange powder that clung to the wind. His mother's knees buckled as she was forced forward, her body trembling with exhaustion and silent fear. He swallowed hard, his pulse thundering in his ears, as he stepped closer, needing to see, needing to understand. The scene unfolded like a nightmare he couldn't wake from, and he felt something inside him shifting dangerously, preparing to snap under the weight of truth. His wife bent forward and lifted a small calabash, scooping a mixture from inside the pit. Thick, decaying, buzzing with flies. The stench carried across the air, hitting him with the sickening force of something rotten and deeply wrong. His mother's hands clutched the edge of the pit weakly, her body bowing under forced submission. He felt his vision blur with a rage so sharp it nearly blinded him. But still he could not move. He could only watch as the woman he married, trusted, and defended prepared to do something unspeakable, something that made the earth itself seem to recoil. She pushed the calabash toward the old woman's face, her features twisted with a coldness he had never seen before. The gesture was not impulsive, it was practiced cruelty, delivered with the precision of someone who enjoyed holding power. His mother's lips trembled, refusing, resisting, shaking like brittle leaves caught in violent wind. His heart clenched as he realized she had endured this before, silently, waiting for a savior who never came. He felt guilt crawl up his spine, heavy and suffocating. But the scene was not done revealing its horrors, and he sensed a darker truth waiting beneath it. He stepped back instinctively as a sudden gust of air lifted the dust around them, as if the land itself wanted to record what was happening. His wife's posture stiffened, her patience thinning, her whisper sharp enough to wound. She shoved the calabash harder, forcing his mother's trembling lips closer to the poisonous mixture. His fists clenched, nails digging into his palms, as the urge to intervene roared through him. But still, he watched, frozen, devastated, disbelieving. Desperate for one more moment to understand the depth of betrayal unfolding before his eyes. Something inside him cracked open, and the breaking wasn't done yet. He finally stepped forward, unable to another second of the unfolding torment, but the sound of his own foot crushing a dry leaf stopped him in place. His wife's head jerked up, her eyes scanning the yard with suspicion, her breath tightening. He ducked behind the mango tree, heart pounding against his ribs. She didn't see him,
but she sensed something.
Her mask flickered for a heartbeat, revealing the serpent beneath. His mind spun, torn between confronting her and retreating for answers. But one truth became painfully clear. Whatever he thought his marriage was, it ended today, and not quietly. The sun climbed slowly over the compound as the old woman sat beneath the neem tree, her fragile hands resting on her lap, unaware that the world around her had already begun to turn against her. She had come into her son's home with hope, believing warmth awaited her after years of lonely widowhood. Her heart carried memories of raising him alone, sacrificing youth and comfort to see him grow into a man. She thought marriage would finally grant her rest, safety, and companionship. Instead, the air around her thickened with unspoken hostility she tried desperately to ignore, but couldn't escape forever. She had noticed the subtle shifts first, the way her daughter-in-law's smile tightened whenever she entered a room, the loud clatter of pots whenever she asked innocent questions, the sudden coldness in meals served without kindness. She brushed these signs aside, telling herself that young women simply needed time to adjust. But the signs multiplied. Her chores increased, her meals shrank, and her voice became something the household treated like background noise. She reassured herself daily, convincing her heart that patience would build love. But deep down, she wondered whether she had stepped into a home that didn't want her. One morning, she woke to find her clothes missing from the line, replaced by rags that smelled of kerosene. Another day, her walking stick mysteriously disappeared, leaving her to drag her feet across the compound with trembling weakness. She never questioned it openly. She didn't want to be a burden. Instead, she prayed quietly that misunderstandings would heal. Yet every act of cruelty chipped away at her spirit, leaving her body bent not just from age, but from humiliation. She tried to hide her hurt, believing her son must never know. But secrets like this don't stay hidden for long. Every evening, she prepared her son's favorite dishes with shaky hands, hoping that food would bridge the growing distance between herself and her daughter-in-law. She greeted the younger woman with warmth, offered help, and tried to win her affection through gentleness. But the response was always the same: cold eyes, stiff shoulders, and resentment simmering beneath forced politeness. The old woman wondered what she had done wrong, searching her heart for offenses she never committed. She saw the home she once dreamed of crumble around her, yet she endured silently, believing that love would eventually melt the hostility she faced daily. Her health began to decline, not from age, but from stress. She developed headaches from constant fear, lost appetite from constant insults, and grew weaker from endless chores. Each time she stumbled, her daughter-in-law's eyes flashed with something resembling victory rather than concern. Still, the old woman held on to hope, telling herself that family ties would soften the young woman eventually. She stayed quiet, choosing peace over confrontation. But silence, in a house where cruelty thrives, becomes a dangerous thing. And every day she stayed silent, her daughter-in-law's confidence grew bolder, darker, and more willing to cross boundaries. She often sat by the window at night, watching the moon carve pale lines across the compound. She wondered if she made a mistake by moving in, wondered if her presence intruded on a life already struggling for balance. But her son's visits, short, warm, affectionate, kept her anchored. She told herself the hostility was temporary. She told herself respect would come. She told herself she just needed to endure. But she didn't know the truth, that her suffering wasn't an accident of personality clashes, but a planned erosion of her dignity. A plan growing bolder each passing day, waiting to strike. The morning she was first led toward the pit, she believed it was a misunderstanding, that maybe her daughter-in-law meant to show her something or needed help. But when the woman's grip tightened around her wrist, pain shot through her body, and something inside her broke, a realization she didn't want to accept. The home she thought would shelter her had become a cage. And the daughter-in-law she prayed to bond with had become a threat lurking inside her own son's compound. Yet even then, she kept the secret buried, hoping love would protect her. But love arrived too late, and not gently. She moved through the compound like a performance, every step rehearsed, every expression calculated. In front of neighbors, her laughter rang out easily as she handed food to children and greeted elders with lowered eyes and respectful bows. Her wrapper was always neat, her hair carefully styled, her tone soaked in sweetness. People often said her husband was lucky, that his wife was a rare gem. She accepted every compliment like a crown on her head. No one noticed how her jaw tightened the moment backs were turned, or how her eyes hardened whenever the old woman's shadow crossed her path. She learned early how to use perception like a weapon. Whenever visitors arrived, she placed the old woman in a quiet corner with a plate of food, smiling proudly as she mentioned how she insisted Mama must eat first. The words were sugar-coated lies, masking the reality that most days, Mama ate last, if anything remained. The guests saw a devoted daughter-in-law, not the cold strategist calculating how much sympathy she could extract. The old woman kept her eyes lowered, unwilling to expose the truth, fearing her son would be torn in ways his heart might not survive. She monitored every interaction between mother and son with the vigilance of a jealous guard. When he laughed too long with his mother, she found ways to pull him away, complaining of sudden headaches, pressing imaginary emergencies into his hands, creating petty conflicts that demanded his attention. Over time, his visits with his mother shortened, squeezed between distractions. The wife's satisfaction grew with each interruption. She believed she was winning, tightening her grip on his loyalty, turning his affection into something she could ration. She didn't know that control built on manipulation always comes with a hidden bill. She sprinkled small stories into conversations with neighbors, shaping the village's perception. She spoke of the old woman's forgetfulness, exaggerating minor incidents into worrisome tales. She hinted that Mama sometimes refused to eat or forgot to take her medicine, painting herself as the patient caretaker of a difficult elder. People nodded sympathetically, praising her strength. The more they praised her, the bolder her lies became. Each invented flaw gave her more room to justify cruelty in her own mind. If they believed Mama was becoming a burden, then her harshness felt, to her, like discipline rather than abuse. Inside the house, her true nature roamed freely. She assigned tasks that strained the old woman's weak body, sweeping large sections of the compound alone, washing heavy pots, fetching water, even when her knees ached. If Mama moved too slowly, she slammed objects on the table, letting the sound carry more threat than words ever could. She never needed to shout. Her silence screamed enough. Her cruelty lived in the small things, serving cold food, hiding her slippers, pretending not to hear when the old woman called. Each act chipped at the elder's dignity, leaving wounds no one could see. At night, she lay beside her husband with a soft expression, asking gentle questions about his work, offering encouragement, massaging his shoulders when stress crept in. She listened attentively, creating a safe space only for him, positioning herself as the woman who understood him best. If he ever mentioned his mother's tiredness, she responded with carefully measured concern, suggesting perhaps Mama needed more rest, more time alone, less stress. Her words sounded thoughtful, but beneath them, she was building a case, slowly shifting responsibility away from herself, planting seeds that framed the old woman as fragile, overly sensitive, burdensome. Her confidence grew with each day the truth remained hidden. She believed the universe itself favored her deception, rewarding her cleverness with trust and admiration. The pit was her final masterpiece. An invention she told herself was spiritual cleansing, a twisted remedy for a woman she claimed was resisting peace. Yet it was nothing more than a grave dressed as discipline. She stood over it with satisfaction, convinced she had complete control over everyone's perception. What she didn't know was that the same mask she used to deceive the world had begun to crack, and someone was already staring through the fracture. The pit didn't begin as a hole in the ground. It began as an idea, born from resentment that simmered like hot oil inside her chest. She dug it alone behind the withered shrubs where no one ever walked, her hands moving with a determination that frightened even her. The soil was soft, betraying how recently the rains had fallen, and each scoop of earth felt like she was carving a secret space for her bitterness to breathe. She whispered to herself as she worked, convincing her heart this was discipline, not destruction. But the pit seemed to grow darker each time she returned. She layered the bottom of the pit with leftovers she deliberately allowed to spoil, bones crawling with ants, sour pap, rotting vegetables melting into mush. The stench rose like an insult to the air, twisting upward in hot, pungent waves. She sprinkled strange herbs over it, convincing herself it symbolized cleansing, though she had no real understanding of the leaves she used. The mixture hissed under the sun, attracting flies that hovered greedily. She watched the bubbling decay with satisfaction, imagining how humiliation would break the old woman's will. Still, she wasn't finished. The pit demanded something even darker. She fetched a bottle hidden under the bed, a repurposed container filled with a bitter concoction she created from ground seeds, stale palm wine, and something she once heard was potent enough to numb the tongue. She had no knowledge of actual poisons, but she believed the mixture would weaken the old woman just enough to keep her obedient. She poured it into the pit slowly, watching the foul mixture absorb into the soil like a hungry mouth drinking secrets. The fumes sharpened immediately, burning her nostrils. She coughed but smiled through it, convinced her power was now complete. She returned at dawn each morning to stir the contents with a long stick, ensuring the decay stayed active. Steam sometimes rose from the pit, carrying odors so vile they clung to her clothes. But she didn't mind. She saw the pit as a throne of control, her hidden tool for breaking the old woman without leaving visible scars. Each day she imagined Mama kneeling there, trembling before her, begging for mercy. The fantasy fed her hunger for dominance. She believed fear would make the old woman disappear emotionally long before any physical harm arrived. She never predicted the pit's real consequence. The first time she tested her plan, she led the old woman toward the pit with false sweetness, masking her intention behind small talk and gentle hands. Mama followed, trusting, unaware of the danger waiting beneath the shrubs. The moment they reached the pit, the wife's hand tightened and her voice dropped into cold authority. She ordered the old woman to kneel. The fear that flashed across Mama's face delighted her. She pointed to the rotting mixture and demanded she eat. Mama's lips trembled in refusal, but refusal was the one thing the wife had no patience left for. Her cruelty deepened that day. Each forced visit to the pit weakened the old woman, physically and emotionally. She grew dizzy after each punishment, her knees wobbling, her hands shaking violently. The wife interpreted this as the pit doing its work, believing she was cleansing stubbornness rather than breaking a human spirit. She watched the old woman stumble away afterward, head bowed, body quivering. The wife told herself the village would thank her if they knew how much discipline she was offering. But cracks had begun forming in her plan. The old woman wasn't the only one retreating toward weakness. Her own secrets were retreating toward exposure. The morning the husband returned early, the pit was still fresh from her latest mixture. Flies hovered like silent witnesses, and the rotten fumes rose in slow, accusing spirals. She didn't notice the world watching her. She didn't see the mango tree rustling or the shadow hidden behind it. She only saw her power, felt it, believed in it, completely unaware that the pit she prepared in darkness had finally drawn light. And as she forced the old woman forward with ruthless confidence, her life moved dangerously close to a cliff she didn't know she was standing on. He stepped back from the mango tree, gripping its rough bark as though it could steady the chaos tearing through him. His breath came in uneven bursts, each inhale sharper than the last. He felt trapped between two worlds, one built on love, promises, and the belief that he chose a good wife. The other built on the woman who gave him life, now trembling before someone he trusted. His mind raced, scrambling for explanations that didn't exist. A sickening truth crawled into his chest. He hadn't just witnessed a moment of cruelty. He had witnessed a secret life. And it wasn't done unraveling. At the back of the house, unable to stand still as his thoughts collided, the image of his mother kneeling haunted him. Her fragile shoulders shaking, her hands reaching weakly for balance, her eyes clouded with fear she never showed him. He replayed their conversations, searching for hidden pain she might have buried to protect him. Guilt wrapped around his throat, squeezing tightly. How long had she suffered? How many silent cries had he missed while believing everything at home was peaceful? His heartbeat turned into a drum of shame, pounding louder with each unanswered question. He stopped near the water tank, staring at his reflection in the metal surface. His eyes looked unfamiliar, darker, angrier, wounded. He'd spent years defending his wife, praising her kindness, assuring the village he had chosen well. Now he saw how easily he'd been deceived. The lie felt personal, intimate, as though she'd betrayed not just his mother but the foundation of his own identity. A sharp heat flared in his chest, something between rage and heartbreak. He wanted to march forward, drag her away from the pit, demand answers, but fear held him back. Fear of what else he didn't know. He pressed his palm over his mouth, trying to silence the trembling gasp rising from his chest. He imagined confronting her, her tears, her excuses, her practiced innocence, performances he had once believed. Would she twist the story again? Would she blame his mother's frailty? Or worse, claim she was helping? His mind spun with competing emotions. Anger, confusion, disbelief. He needed clarity before acting. He needed to understand the full extent of the cruelty before making a decision that could destroy his home forever. So he remained hidden, watching, listening, letting the truth speak louder than her lies ever could. He looked toward the pit again and felt something inside him fracture. His mother struggled to rise, gripping her wrapper as though it could shield her from the shame forced upon her. The sight ignited protectiveness he hadn't felt since childhood, a fierce, primal instinct to defend the woman who raised him with nothing but sacrifice. Yet another part of him, broken, disillusioned, whispered caution. If he exposed his wife too quickly, she would twist the story, weaponize tears, manipulate the village. He needed proof stronger than words. He needed a strategy that matched the depth of her deception. He crouched behind the tree, breathing slowly, forcing himself into stillness. The weight of choice pressed cold against his spine. If he chose his wife, he would betray the woman who once walked miles to buy him medicine. If he chose his mother, he risked tearing apart a marriage he once believed was his future. But standing between them, he saw the truth clearly for the first time. One was suffering in silence, the other was thriving in cruelty. His soul anchored itself to the truth instinctively. Blood has a way of calling itself home, especially when danger draws near. He rose slowly to his feet, a decision forming like storm clouds gathering strength. The tremor in his hands steadied. His chest expanded with purpose. He wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet, but he was ready to act. What he witnessed demanded justice, not reaction. He would protect his mother with every heartbeat in his body. But he would also make sure the world saw the truth she hid behind her smile. The seeds of revenge planted themselves quietly in his mind, taking root with frightening clarity. And as he stepped away from the tree, he knew the reckoning had just begun. He guided his mother gently into the shade of the veranda, his hands trembling as he supported her shaking frame. The moment her body relaxed into the wooden chair, she released a breath she had been holding for months. Sweat clung to her forehead, her wrapper dusty from the ground, her lips cracked from fear. He knelt before her, searching her face for answers she struggled to form. Her eyes darted around the compound as though expecting his wife to reappear at any moment. The silence between them stretched heavy and aching until her shoulders finally slumped, surrendering to truth. She lifted a fragile hand to her chest, pressing against the place where her heartbeat fluttered weakly. Her voice came out in a broken whisper, barely rising above the hum of afternoon heat. She told him the pit wasn't new. She told him the punishments began small: cold meals, harsh chores, strange mixtures forced on her under the guise of cleansing. Then her voice cracked as she revealed how those punishments grew darker each week. Every word felt like a blade carving into his heart, carving into the image of peace he once believed existed within their home. Her frail fingers traced the bruises hidden beneath her wrapper. Yellowing marks along her ribs, patches on her arms where she'd been grabbed too tightly. She confessed how she pretended to fall, pretended to forget things, pretended to be clumsy so her son wouldn't notice the abuse. She wanted to protect him from heartbreak, believing his marriage meant too much to risk destroying. As she spoke, tears slipped down her cheeks silently, each one carrying months of swallowed pain. The shame in her eyes sliced through him. She felt guilty for surviving something she never should have faced alone. She leaned closer, her breath trembling, as she revealed the moment fear replaced hope, when she realized the pit wasn't just humiliation but danger. The wife had grown bolder, harsher, more unstable in her cruelty. The concoction in the pit made her dizzy, made her chest burn, made her nights sleepless. She whispered that the last time she ate from it, she felt her legs fail beneath her. That was when she knew this was not discipline, nor misunderstanding. This was intent. A cold, calculated desire to erase her existence. The words shook inside him like thunder rolling too close. She clutched his wrist suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong, her eyes wide with the terror of someone who had carried too much alone. She told him she tried to escape the abuse quietly, by staying out of the wife's path, by praying, by hiding her weakness. But everywhere she turned, cruelty waited. The pit became her nightmare, a place she feared more than death itself. She whispered that she sometimes wished he would come home early, sometimes wished someone would see. She didn't know that today, fate would finally open the door she prayed for, but not gently. He felt his throat tighten as he listened, each confession striking like lightning across a dry landscape. The truth rearranged something inside him, burning through illusion and denial. He realized how thoroughly his wife manipulated him, how her sweetness was a curtain hiding a theater of cruelty. Regret stabbed him deeply. He should have seen the signs. He should have protected the woman who raised him, loved him, forgave him without hesitation. As the old woman's voice weakened, he caught the final whisper that shattered him completely. "I stayed quiet because I didn't want you to choose between us." He rose slowly, every movement fueled by a storm rising in his chest. The softness in him evaporated, replaced by a sharp, cold determination. His mother sagged back in the chair, her confession draining the last bit of strength she had. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just a victim but a survivor who had endured the unimaginable. And he knew what had to come next. There would be no forgiveness without truth. No peace without consequences. No mercy for the one who pushed his mother toward death. As he stepped away from her, one vow crystallized: this ends today. The wife paced inside the bedroom, her steps sharp and restless, unaware that her carefully hidden world had begun to unravel outside. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, adjusting the wrapper around her waist, trying to regain the composure she always wore like a second skin. But beneath her polished exterior, her mind churned with resentment. She replayed every moment the mother-in-law had outshined her. The cooking praises, the affectionate stories, the bond between mother and son she never belonged to. Each memory gnawed at her pride. She didn't see cruelty in herself, she saw competition. And she intended to win. Her resentment didn't grow overnight. It sprouted the first week Mama moved in, when she overheard her husband laughing warmly at his mother's jokes, laughter she struggled to earn. The sound felt like a theft, a reminder that Mama had a place in his heart she couldn't access. So she watched closely, taking note of every interaction, every shared smile, every quiet moment between them. What began as insecurity hardened into jealousy. Jealousy hardened into bitterness. And bitterness, left unchecked, evolved into something darker. Something dangerous. Something that convinced her the old woman wasn't just family, she was a threat. She convinced herself that the home belonged solely to her. Every wall, every decision, every heartbeat inside it. Mama's presence disrupted that illusion, introducing tenderness she didn't know how to compete with. She watched the old woman fold clothes with gentle care, pray softly at dawn, hum lullabies while cooking. Each act reminded her of the roles she couldn't fill, the warmth she didn't possess, the nurturing she never learned. Instead of acknowledging her own emptiness, she blamed the old woman for exposing it. Cruelty became her shield. Control became her language. And the pit became her proof of power. The inheritance rumors didn't help. She overheard neighbors talking about how Mama once owned land in the village, land that would one day pass to her son. In her twisted interpretation, Mama keeping a close bond with him meant she might influence decisions that left the wife feeling excluded. She feared losing financial control, feared Mama advising her son in ways that didn't favor her. These fears mutated into obsession. In her mind, removing the old woman wasn't cruelty, it was securing her future. The poisonous pit wasn't punishment, it was protection. Everything she did, she justified with desperation. She recalled the day she first tested the pit, how the old woman recoiled in fear. That fear intoxicated her. It made her feel powerful in a world where she always felt overshadowed. Each forced humiliation erased her insecurity for a moment, replacing it with dominance. She told herself the old woman needed discipline, that she was too stubborn, too opinionated, too influential. But beneath those lies, another truth lurked. She enjoyed breaking someone who reminded her of everything she wasn't: kind, wise, loved. The pit wasn't designed to cleanse Mama, it was designed to cleanse the wife's own bitterness. As she paced the room now, her mind raced with calculations. She wondered if Mama would stay quiet today. She wondered if her husband suspected anything. She wondered how much longer she could keep her two identities separate, the adored wife and the silent tormentor. Fear flickered briefly in her chest, quickly smothered by pride. She had controlled the narrative for months. No one questioned her. No one doubted her. She believed she was untouchable. But outside, the air had shifted. Secrets were beginning to loosen. Truth was threading its way toward her. And she didn't know that her motives were moments from exposure. She stepped outside to check the pit again, her footsteps slow and calculating. But the compound felt different, too still, too watchful. She scanned the yard, expecting Mama to be exactly where she left her, ready to break again. Instead, she found the space empty. A cold wave washed over her. She called out softly, testing the air, her heartbeat rising. Something was wrong. Something had shifted beyond her control. And as she moved closer to the pit, the faint echo of whispers drifted from the veranda, whispers carrying her name with tones she had never heard before. Her secrets were no longer secrets. A quiet murmur drifted through the village long before the wife stepped outside again. Children who had been playing in the dusty courtyard paused to stare toward the compound. Women carrying water slowed their steps, exchanging glances heavy with curiosity. Word spreads quickly in a small community, and whispers had already begun weaving themselves through the morning air. Something had happened at that compound, something that smelled of wrongdoing. Neighbors who once praised the wife now watched her with narrowed eyes, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. And the deeper that silence settled, the more the truth began pulling people closer. Two village elders approached cautiously, drawn by the uneasy stillness. They noticed the disturbed soil near the pit, the scattered flies, the faint rotten smell rising like smoke from a hidden fire. They exchanged troubled looks, recognizing signs that didn't belong in a healthy household. The shrubs trembled slightly under the weight of recent struggle. One elder stepped forward, bending to examine the ground. He saw footprints, deep, dragging marks, as if someone had been forced against their will. The discovery tightened something in his chest. Trouble was here. And trouble in one family always has a way of reaching everyone. The wife stepped into the open with a stiff smile, hoping charm could smooth the rising suspicion. She greeted the neighbors with exaggerated brightness, asking about their morning chores as though nothing unusual lingered in the air. But her voice wavered, and her eyes darted nervously toward the veranda. The villagers noticed. They saw the tension in her posture, the thin film of sweat on her forehead, the way she hugged her arms tightly around her waist. The mask she had worn for months began to slip, not with a dramatic break, but with thousands of small cracks finally catching the sunlight. A neighbor, a woman known for speaking her mind, stepped closer and asked where Mama was. The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to drop. The wife forced a laugh, claiming Mama had gone to rest. But at that same moment, the old woman's fragile voice drifted from the veranda, weak, trembling, unmistakably distressed. The neighbor's eyes widened. The elders froze. The wife's smile collapsed instantly. She stuttered, searching for a new lie to stitch the moment together, but the truth was already seeping through the seams. Suspicion transformed into certainty, and the village leaned in. The husband emerged then, supporting his shaken mother. The sight sent a wave of murmurs through the gathering crowd. Mama's wrapper was dusty, her skin marked with bruises, her eyes holding a terror no elder should ever carry. One of the elders stepped forward, demanding to know what had happened. The wife's breath hitched, her fingers trembling as she reached for explanations that no longer held weight. She tried appealing to sympathy, but even the wind seemed to recoil from her words. The villagers had seen too much, felt too much. The performance that shielded her was finally collapsing. The husband uncovered the truth in steady, deliberate fragments, revealing the pit, the forced humiliation, the long months of silent suffering. Each detail landed heavily on the crowd, drawing gasps, whispers, and sharp exclamations of disbelief. Women covered their mouths in horror. Men shook their heads with anger. Children clung to their mothers' wrappers, sensing danger in the adult voices. The village had seen wickedness before, but nothing as calculated as this. The elders exchanged looks that spoke of consequences. What she had done was not mere cruelty, it was a violation of everything the community held sacred. The wife stepped backward as the crowd closed in, not to harm her, but to witness her fall. Their eyes pressed against her like 1,000 mirrors reflecting the truth she tried to bury. Shame wrapped around her, heavy and suffocating. She tried to speak, to reclaim her narrative, but every word crumbled under the weight of exposure. She felt panic grip her chest as the villagers whispered her name like an accusation. She realized too late that cruelty done in shadows always finds its way to the sun. And now, surrounded and cornered, she understood. Her judgment had finally arrived. He stood in the center of the compound, the crowd forming a silent ring around him, the weight of his mother leaning weakly into his side. His face held no rage, only a chilling calm that unsettled everyone watching. The wife, trembling near the pit, realized she was looking at a version of her husband she had never seen before. His silence was heavier than shouting, colder than accusation. It was the silence of a man who had reached the end of forgiveness. Slowly, he released his mother's hand, stepped toward the pit, and began the revenge that would echo across the village. He picked up the long stick she always used to stir the pit, turning it in his hands with a contemplation that made the wife's knees weaken. The villagers watched breathlessly as he scraped the surface of the foul mixture, letting its stench rise and fill the air, the same stench she had forced his mother to endure. He lifted the stick, dripping with decay, and held it toward his wife. The meaning pierced her instantly. Fear sliced through her composure. She shook her head violently, backing away. But this was no longer her stage. Her performance was over. His justice was beginning. He ordered her, quietly, firmly, to kneel exactly where she had made his mother kneel. The villagers gasped, some stepping forward instinctively, unsure if he truly intended to mirror the cruelty she inflicted. But his expression remained unbroken, a stone mask carved by betrayal. She stumbled backward, protesting, but the ring of villagers closed tighter, guiding her toward the very pit she created. Every step she took felt like a descent into her own wickedness. She looked at him with pleading eyes, searching for the softness she once manipulated. But there was none. The man before her had chosen justice. She collapsed to her knees beside the pit, gagging as the foul smell pressed against her. Her hands trembled uncontrollably, gripping the edges of the hole she once forced another to kneel at. The villagers watched in stunned silence, some nodding in grim agreement, others whispering prayers. Her chest tightened as she realized the pit felt different from this side, from the side of vulnerability. He stood above her, towering like a verdict she could not escape. But he did not force her to eat. He did something worse. He made her confront everything she had done while the entire village bore witness. He instructed her to stir the mixture as she had done countless times before, this time under the scorching eyes of the crowd. Her hands shook so violently the stick nearly fell from her grip. She gagged as the fumes curled around her, burning her throat. The humiliation washed over her like acid, stripping away the arrogance she once wore proudly. Each rotation of the stick became an eerie echo of her past cruelty, every circle a silent confession. The villagers murmured their approval. She felt their judgment surrounding her, swallowing her pride whole. She had built this pit. Now it owned her. When she finally dropped the stick, sobbing, he stepped closer and delivered the strike she never saw coming. Not physical, but psychological. He announced, in front of every elder and neighbor, that she would no longer share his home, his name, or his life. Gasps rippled through the compound. Her heart cracked open as the reality struck her. She wasn't just being punished. She was being removed. He declared that from that moment, she would face the community's judgment alone. She reached for him desperately, but he stepped away, leaving her hand suspended in the air like a broken plea. He turned his back on her, lifting his mother gently into his arms, and the collective silence deepened into something monumental. The villagers parted for him like water responding to gravity, allowing him and his mother to pass through with dignity. Behind him, the wife collapsed in the dirt beside the pit, her cries echoing against the walls she once ruled with cruelty. The pit had reclaimed its creator, not through violence, but through exposure. And as the husband carried his mother towards safety, the village understood. Some revenges strike harder, without a single blow, leaving the guilty to drown in their own consequences. She remained kneeling in the dirt long after the crowd dispersed, her breath shaking in small, broken bursts. The pit's stench clung to her wrapper, rising in hot waves that made her gag with every inhale. But worse than the smell was the silence, an emptiness filled with eyes that refused to look at her anymore. The woman who once commanded attention in every gathering now sat alone, unwanted, reduced. Each second stretched painfully, her mind replaying the moment her husband turned away. Pride had been her greatest weapon, but now it lay shattered at her feet, sharp enough to cut her. She forced herself to stand, legs trembling, and walked toward the compound with small, uneven steps. Neighbors who once greeted her now stepped aside without a word, their faces stiff with disapproval. Some whispered behind their hands, others watched openly, their eyes filled with disappointment and disbelief. Her skin prickled with heat as shame settled over her like a heavy cloth. She tried straightening her back, tried reclaiming a sliver of the confidence she once carried effortlessly. But every glance reminded her she could no longer hide behind charm. Her deeds had escaped her grasp, and the village refused to forget. She reached her doorway, but the home that once felt like a throne now felt foreign and cold. The chairs seemed to reject her, the walls echoing her misdeeds. She walked inside and saw the belongings she once took pride in: the polished floor, the neatly arranged shelves, the carefully chosen decorations. None of it mattered. Her status meant nothing now. Without reputation, without her husband's trust, without the admiration she fed on, these objects were just silent witnesses to her downfall. She sank onto the floor, burying her face in her hands, realizing she had lost not just her marriage, but her identity. Outside, a group of elders gathered to discuss her fate. The air pulsed with tension as they recounted the details of her cruelty, referencing traditions that condemned the mistreatment of elders. They spoke of consequences: separation, communal sanctions, and cleansing rituals to restore harmony. Their voices carried through the courtyard, reaching her where she sat trembling inside. Each word felt like a blow, reminding her that her sins were no longer private. She pressed her palms against her ears, trying to block out the rising tide of judgment, but the truth seeped through every crack. The community had declared her unfit. As afternoon shadows stretched across the yard, women from neighboring compounds arrived, gathering in small clusters. Their faces held a blend of anger and sorrow. One pointed toward the pit, shaking her head in disbelief. Another murmured a prayer, horrified that any woman could torment an elder. Their voices rolled like waves, loud, relentless, unavoidable. She watched from inside as their condemnation grew, crushing any hope of sympathy. Her pride once soared on their approval, but now their disapproval tore at her like claws. She realized painfully that reputation, once broken, cannot be swept back together like spilled grain. The final blow came when her own relatives arrived, summoned by whispers that traveled faster than news itself. They walked past her without offering comfort, their expressions filled with humiliation. Her aunt confronted her with a stare so sharp it felt like a slap. The shame stung deeper than any punishment the village could deliver. She tried to explain, but her voice cracked, tangled in excuses the world no longer believed. Her relatives shook their heads and turned away, distancing themselves from her disgrace. She felt something collapse inside, a hollowing emptiness where her confidence once lived, leaving her exposed and trembling. Night fell, bringing no peace. She sat alone in the darkness, replaying every cruel act she once justified, every humiliation she forced on the old woman. Now the silence punished her more than any physical pain. She felt the village watching even through the shadows, felt judgment pressing from unseen corners. She realized too late that cruelty, once unleashed, always circles back home. The pit she dug for another had become the graveyard of her own pride. And as she curled into herself, shivering beneath the weight of consequences, one truth settled coldly into her bones: her fall was only beginning. At dawn, the husband returned to the quiet hut where his mother lay resting, her thin breath rising in soft tremors. The room smelled of shea balm and warm pap, the gentle sense of care replacing the bitterness of yesterday. He knelt beside her, his heart heavy with guilt for not seeing the truth sooner. As sunlight slipped through the raffia curtain and touched her face, he reached for her frail hand, feeling how fragile time had made her. In that moment, a silent vow formed inside him, one born from regret and fierce love. Never again would she suffer under his roof. He lifted a bowl of warm millet porridge and guided it gently to her lips, watching as she sipped with slow, grateful motions. Every gesture felt like stitching together a wound he hadn't known was this deep. The old woman's eyes fluttered open, cloudy yet soft. Recognizing the son, she once carried on her back through storms and sickness. She tried to speak, but the pain in her throat silenced her. He hushed her gently, brushing a stray gray hair from her cheek. The room held a fragile tenderness, as though both were learning how to breathe again after drowning. When she finally gathered enough strength, she pointed weakly toward the backyard, the pit that had become her daily nightmare. But instead of fear, her eyes carried something new: release. She no longer needed to hide her wounds or protect the woman who had tormented her. Her truth was no longer a secret buried in the dirt. The son's face tightened with sorrow and anger, but he held her hand firmly, letting her know the suffering ended yesterday. Today belonged to healing. And for the first time in months, she exhaled without trembling, realizing she was finally safe, completely and unquestionably. A soft breeze drifted into the room as he opened the window, letting in morning birdsong and the smell of dew settling on fresh earth. The peaceful sounds washed over her like medicine. He began cleaning the room, moving slowly, almost reverently, folding her wrapper, airing her pillow, replacing her broken water pot. Every movement was a wordless apology. She watched him, her eyes filling with tears, not from pain but from the shock of being cared for again. His hands, once small enough to fit in hers, now worked tirelessly to rebuild the comfort she had been denied. Later, neighbors arrived quietly, women who had once doubted her whispers of mistreatment. Now they stepped into the room with bowls of herbs, warm cloths, and soft greetings, carrying compassion where suspicion once lived. They massaged her legs with healing oils and stroked her arms with comforting tenderness. The old woman wept silently, overwhelmed by kindness after so much cruelty. Her son watched from the doorway, feeling a small light ignite inside him. The same village that witnessed her humiliation was now witnessing her restoration. And in their presence, the weight she carried alone for months finally began to lift. As evening settled, he sat beside her again, telling gentle stories from his childhood. Times when she braided his hair, carried him to the stream, or prayed over him during fevers. Each memory rekindled warmth inside her chest, reminding her that love still lived in this world despite the shadows she endured. She reached out, placing a trembling hand on his cheek, her fingertips recognizing the boy she raised beneath the man he had become. He held her hand against his face, letting silence speak for them both. In that soft exchange, the broken bond between them began to heal. Before night fully claimed the sky, he made her a promise, softly, firmly, the kind that roots itself deep in the soul. He vowed to protect her from anyone who dared harm her again, to rebuild her strength, to return her dignity, to ensure her remaining years would be filled with peace, not fear. As she drifted into sleep, comforted by his words, he felt the weight of responsibility settle over him, not as a burden, but as a sacred calling. Tomorrow would bring consequences for the woman who hurt her, but tonight belonged to healing, restoration, and a bond finally mended. By sunrise, the village square throbbed with restless whispers as people gathered around the center platform, waiting for the council to speak. The air felt heavy, as though the earth itself knew judgment was coming. The wife stood alone, her once confident shoulders trembling beneath a wrapper she could barely keep tied. Every pair of eyes, ones that once admired her beauty, praised her cooking, and greeted her warmly, now watched her with cold disbelief. The pit she created had done more than torture an old woman. It had opened a doorway for the truth to crawl into the light, demanding justice. When the council elders arrived, the crowd fell silent, a silence sharp enough to cut. They listened as the husband stepped forward, recounting what he saw behind the mango tree. The dragging, the threats, the poisonous pit waiting like a mouth ready to swallow dignity. The villagers gasped, each detail painting a clearer picture of cruelty disguised in daily smiles. The wife's legs buckled beneath her, but no one reached to steady her. She had leaned on lies for so long that now, with truth standing tall beside her husband, there was nothing left to hold her upright. The council asked the mother-in-law to speak, but she simply raised her trembling hands and showed the faded bruises that never fully healed. The marks told a story that words could not. A hush settled over the crowd, thick with sorrow and anger. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting to see what fate would decide. The old woman's quiet suffering carried more power than any accusation. It made the cruelty undeniable, stripping away the last fragments of the wife's mask. From that moment, the village no longer debated guilt. They debated how severe her consequences should be. Justice came in the same form as her crime: exposure. The council declared she must clean the very pit she forced her mother-in-law to eat from, but not as punishment alone. She would do it publicly, under supervision, to confront the ugliness of her actions. Her pride shattered as she knelt beside the pit, scraping away the decayed remnants she once used as a weapon. The crowd watched silently, their judgment cutting deeper than any sentence. Each handful of dirt she removed felt like peeling back the layers of deceit she had long wrapped around herself. But justice did not stop at physical humiliation. The council stripped her of every village privilege, festivals, gatherings, market rights, forcing her to live with the weight of her reputation. She became a shadow in a place she once dominated. People avoided her path. Children whispered her story as a warning. The same community she fooled with charm now saw her clearly, and their rejection became a daily reminder of the life she destroyed and the love she poisoned. Slowly, the cost of her actions revealed itself, not with screams, but with silence. From the edge of the crowd, the husband watched with steady eyes, not out of revenge, but closure. His mother stood beside him, her posture weak yet lifted by newfound safety. As the wife bowed over the pit, he realized something profound. Justice was not about breaking her, it was about restoring what she tried to steal. His mother's dignity, his peace, the truth that survived despite cruelty. And in that moment, the husband finally felt the tightness in his chest loosen, as though the earth itself exhaled with him. When night settled over the village, the mother-in-law rested peacefully for the first time in months. The husband sat beside her, the weight of the past easing into memory. Outside, the pit lay empty, no longer a place of torment, but a symbol of justice fulfilled. The wife, isolated and stripped of power, faced a long road of consequences, ones she created with her own hands. The story closed not with revenge, but with restoration. A reminder that cruelty may dig its own pit, but justice always decides who falls into it. And this time, justice finished what the pit started.